Ever get that feeling like you think you're coming down with a cold, but it's like, oh, a trick? And then, bam, it's way worse.
Yeah.
The flu can be like that, sneaky.
Sure.
We're doing a deep dive into the flu today. And we're using some really interesting material you sent us actually from, get this, the Mayo Clinic, but in Arabic.
Oh, wow.
It was fascinating even just seeing it in the original language.
Yeah.
We couldn't translate it all, but even what we got made it clear. The Mayo Clinic, they don't mess around when it comes to the flu.
No, they don't. They really emphasize right off the bat how different it is from a cold.
Yeah.
And one of the big things is, like you were saying, how fast it hits you.
Mm-hmm.
The source, it actually uses the phrase sudden onset. You don't kind of ease into the flu like you might with a cold. 1 minute you're fine, and the next it's like, boom, fever, chills, the body aches, all of it.
So it doesn't waste any time making itself known at home in your body. And I think because of that, we sometimes don't even notice the weirder symptoms because it comes on so strong. Like the source mentioned eye pain and weakness.
Right, and those are really telling, actually, because it's a sign the flu's not just in your head, literally.
Yeah.
It's systemic. The virus is fighting your immune system everywhere, your whole body, not just like a stuffy nose.
So those aches, the exhaustion, even eye pain, it's all connected to that bigger fight going on inside.
Exactly.
Now, there was this phrase, it was in Arabic, obviously, in the original. I thought it was such an interesting way to put it. They wrote, "Exuensen," which basically means often, but not always. And they were talking about the symptoms.
Which is so important to remember, right? We might have this image of like, okay, the flu, you get a fever, you cough.
Yeah.
But it's not always so clear-cut.
It can totally throw curveballs.
Yeah, so even if you think you know the flu, pay attention to anything that seems off, especially, when it's that time of year.
Flu season, for sure. Speaking of which, there was another thing in the Mayo Clinic material that really stood out, how differently kids experience the flu.
Yeah, we often forget how different it can be for kids, right? Like we always say, oh, they bounce back so fast. But when it comes to the flu,
Sometimes, yeah.
it's a whole different ballgame. It can be.
Mm.
And parents, anyone who spends time around kids, really, the Mayo Clinic stuff had some important points there. Like, did you know kids get vomiting and diarrhea with the flu way more than adults?
Really? See, I wouldn't have thought of that.
It surprised me, too. You think, oh, flu, it's a cough, it's congestion.
Right, all about the respiratory stuff.
Yeah, and well, that's definitely there for everyone. Kids get those tummy problems more often. Like, it's just a good reminder that what we think of as typical flu symptoms.
Might not be the whole story.
Exactly, especially for the little ones.
Makes you think. And speaking of things that make you think, that Mayo Clinic material had a whole section about who's most at risk when it comes to the flu.
Oh, yeah, and that was fascinating. Because you'd think, okay, older people,
Sure, makes sense.
which, it's true, they are more vulnerable, but it is so much more than that. The source had this whole list, a whole spectrum of risk factors, way beyond just age.
I was really surprised. It wasn't just like, oh, if you're over 65, watch out. They were talking about chronic illnesses, being pregnant, even like your background, your ethnicity.
And that's huge, right?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about health disparities here. Like, the source specifically called out how certain groups, they just have higher risks of bad flu complications.
Yeah.
Native Americans, Alaska Natives, Black and Hispanic populations, they often get hit harder.
It's like that thing about if you live in a neighborhood where it's tough to find healthy food, you're more likely to have certain health problems.
Exactly. It's bigger than just the virus itself, right? It's the whole picture.
Your environment, your access to healthcare, all of it.
Absolutely. Social determinants of health, they call it.
Right, I've heard that term.
And with the flu, that's crucial.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about getting sick, it's how well you can fight back.
Yeah.
And that involves way more than just, are you coughing today or not?
It really makes you think about the flu in a whole new way, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah,
We kind of take it for granted, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface.
totally. So before we wrap up, let's see, what were those aha moments from the Mayo Clinic material, the things that really stuck out?
For me, it's that speed thing, for one. How it just, wham, lays you out. No messing around. The flu's got a busy schedule, I guess.
Right, no time to waste.
Exactly. And then how it's not just a head cold. It's like your whole system's in on the fight.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, all those risk factors we talked about. It's really not as simple as we think sometimes.
No, it's not. And I'm really glad we dug into that whole thing about different communities, different backgrounds, being more vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something everyone should be aware of, especially as flu season approaches.
Speaking of which, before we let you go, we like to leave our listeners with something to think about based on what we've been talking about. So we were discussing prevention, and the Mayo Clinic material mentioned that even the flu vaccine, it's not perfect.
Right.
So here's a thought. What kinds of things can make a vaccine more or less effective in a given year? And what does that mean for your risk right now?
That is a great question.
Mm.
And it's complicated. It can be the specific flu strains that are going around, how well the vaccine matches up to those strains, even things about each person's health and immune system come into play.
So much to consider.
Definitely. Do your research, folks, and talk to your doctor. It's worth it.
Knowledge is power, right? Especially when it comes to your health. Speaking of, the Mayo Clinic website is a goldmine of good information on all this flu stuff. If you're curious, definitely check it out.
For sure. Stay informed, stay healthy. That's what I always say.
The best advice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the flu this week. Hope you learned some new stuff, maybe feel a little more prepared to take on flu season.
Here's to a healthy season.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.